How's it going, everybody? It's cool. I entered a two-deck format tournament this weekend, and I went undefeated on two decks. I was on Earth, Wind, Storm, obviously, and Rydia Turbo. I figured I'd go over the two decks, talk through them, maybe help people out a little bit that are, have seen me in the past, especially because, I love talking about my Earth, Wind, Storm. Give my thoughts on things, talk things through, and I figured it might be entertaining. So we're going to start with Earth, Wind, Storm. Deck lists, if you just don't want to hear me talk and ramble, will be in the description down below. So, Earth, Wind, Storm. This is obviously the deck that I've been probably the most known for. It's my favorite deck in the game. And I had a couple different options for this deck. I was thinking either Earth, Wind, Storm, Ice, Wind, Storm, or Mono Wind. I don't really like Mono Wind. I think it loses a lot of the control elements that I really find enjoyable in Earthwind. And I had a really interesting Icewind list that I'll probably share in the near future, built around the Terra Legend from Opus 15. But I was missing a couple of cards that I think really helped that deck accelerate, and the problem is that it still has the Mono Wind thing where it's just pure gas, and you try to stop your opponent, like, you kill your opponent once you get to that point, as opposed to Earthwind, which is very much a control deck before it kind of turns on the afterburners in the end, like in the late game, which is what I really enjoy about the deck. It reminds me a lot of Sky Striker and Yu-Gi-Oh, where you kind of slow the game state down, slow the game state down, slow the game state down, and then you go for your big push once you have, resolve 3 engages in a turn and steal all your opponent's board, and with a bunch of Widow Anchors and so on and so forth. So as always, the centerpiece of the deck, 3 copies of Rosa. I don't think I need to explain that one. New addition to the deck is 2 copies of Luso. Weirdly, this deck card is only okay in this list, so it doesn't get reduced with Tilica. And I never really get to 7 casts in Earthwind. I know it's really easy in Mono Wind, but that's not really what this deck is built to do. It's really more built to it's not trying to draw into the pieces so much as it is searching them out. And, my favorite thing about this deck is how often you can look at your board, look at your opponent's board, look at your hand, and say, I'm going to search this piece, and my entire deck is going to function now. And Lusa doesn't really further that, but he is a very cheap body and has the potential to be very powerful. He could very easily be worth playing at 2 in the future, though. Or 1 in the future. Definitely good as a 1-of, just because he's recoverable off of Azura. Makes him a pseudo free cast. 1 copy of Prish. This card continues to impress me every single time I draw her. Sure, there are matchups where she's dead, but if she's dead, she's great to help pay for some of your Earth backups that are a little trickier to get down. And when she's good, she's crazy. One of my favorite tricks is using her to pop your own Typhon, so you can play a new one, since you can't always easily bounce your own Typhons. But even just a lot of times the wind mirrors are determined by who keeps Atomos and who keeps Althea. This deals with the Atomos problem. So anything that kills Atomos is really good right now. This also will kill Scale Toads, which is very important. Would not ever take this card out of the deck, which kind of sucks. I wish there was a better art Prish for that slot, but unfortunately I have to deal with the really old Dissidia art. 2 copies of Mira. Card is crazy. There's 3 targets in the deck. There are times where she'll be basically unable to do anything because you'll have all 3 targets already on field. But basically turning all of your monsters into 2k bigger forwards, being able to recur them for 2 CP is nuts. She's revived Atomos. She revives Ochu. She kind of pays for herself on entry, even more so if you pay her off of Atilica. Just a really, really strong, powerful card. I'm not even on Luminous Puma, which I know is like the traditional like big combo. So like I'm low rolling with this card, and I'm still like she's so good and so powerful. 2 copies of Kryl. It's funny. When I was first building this deck, multiple people kept telling me like, oh, you could probably put Kryl to 1, put Kryl to 1. She's just so good. Like I think this card is criminally underplayed. I think almost any Earth deck almost should be considering this, unless you're on something that is really trying to recur your summons at all costs. She's just so versatile, so especially when you can play her for 1 CP and continue chains. I'm down to just one copy of 3 CP Zidane. I kind of kept bricking on him at 3 for a while, so that's kind of where the extra 2 Luso slots came from. And he's been respectable. Of note, I think one of the Lusos might leave for a copy of Null. But, I mean, Zidane's been, like, he's still great. There's a lot of recovery in this deck to pull him back out of the break zone if you need to. I donked him off of a Rosa 5 cast once, I believe. So, like, when he's good, he's still really good. We're just not seeing him early game as often, which is great. 2 copies of Lulu. Again, I think one of the most powerful things in this game is when you can find 2 cards that do the same thing with different names. So, Lulu and Kryl are basically the same card in this deck. So she's good. Speaking of cards that do the same thing with a different name, 1 copy of Iris and 1 copy of Yuna. They are, for all intents and purposes, the same card. But one is named Yuna, one is named Iris. So you can cast both of them in a turn and not have any issues with it. Iris is a better card on field. Yuna activates more backups. But like you're splitting hairs. It does not matter which one you have. When you need to reactivate your backups to get a free cast, either of them will do, and they're both reasonably sized forwards. I'm going to go ahead and skip here. So the reason to play Earthwind over any other variant is these. 1 copy of Titan Lord of Crags, 1 copy of Shadow Lord. I've seen a lot of people cutting the Titans for the Shadow Lords. Don't do that. Play a copy of this card. Best deck in the game right now, Mono Windstorm. This does nothing to it. This will at least wipe the board. I don't know that wiping the board for 7 is necessarily enough against Mono Wind, but at least you can. So anything that's not a tribal, this will handle much better than this will, and not every deck is tribal. Do not be baited by the fact that Shadow Lord can kill more, like anything with the fact that Titan is not is a bad card. Titan is still crazy. Play this card. Speaking of primals, 2 copies of Bismarck. And then, of course, the classic Storm Payoff. 2 copies of Locke. You'll notice there are no other ice cards. If you're playing this, it has to come in off of a Shantota or a Tyro. Doesn't matter. Card is still worth playing. You can resolve this 3 times in a turn, at which point your opponent will have no backups and no hand, and probably no field, at which point they will lose the game. Up next, the backups. 3 copies of Nordstalin. No explanation needed. 2 copies of Fiona. This is my favorite card in the deck. I will almost always search this off of this because this represents any of the other cards I need at any time. I think the really good wind pilots are the ones that are able to use Fiona the best. It's another reason I don't like Mono Wind Storm is because Mono Wind does not play Fiona because it is not focused on search, it is focused on draw power. And Fiona fights too much for cast relative to what other cards you're going for. The other Crystal Chronicles backups, 2 copies of Tilica, 2 copies of Althea. I was on 1 Althea previously, but it's one of those situations that's kind of started to happen where, again, I expected Mono Wind to be the best deck of the format. And a lot of times Mono Wind is determined by who gets Althea down and who gets Atomos down first. So essentially having an extra copy of Althea makes it more likely to draw her. It does mean that your backup line is pretty static. You're almost always going to have a Nordstalin, you're going to have a Fiona, you're going to have a Tilica, you're going to have an Althea, and you're going to have one of your 2 Omnis in Tyro or Shantotto. Shantotto is fine to come down. You can be a little bit aggressive with this card right now, I feel like. If your opponent has even just 2 forwards and you don't have any, just slap her down. There's enough other searchable board wipes in the deck. Tyro can search 1. If you need to not have the Tilica or the Althea to get down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like this is totally fine. This deck can play just fine without Althea. It can play just fine without Tilica. And then, of course, later on, you can also bounce the Nordstalin to make room for all 5 of your power backups. Only other backup on the deck, 1 copy of 3 CP Rydia. Honestly, I might consider swapping this for 2 CP White Mage, just to have a breakable cheap backup that can come down turn 1. Rydia's inability to break is very difficult to deal with, and you can't even bounce her with Bismarck to get her out of the backup line. But searching a summon is one of the most powerful effects, and this deck really takes advantage of it well. So we're going to go ahead and put this over here. For the monsters, best one, 2 copies of Atomos, 2 copies of Typhon, 1 Ochu. I keep thinking if I should cut the one Ochu, but it's just so good to always have a Mira target. Like you could just pitch this early and get it back later with Mira when you want to actually do stormy things. It almost needs no explanation. I wish this was more easily searchable, but it's just not worth playing a 4 CP Daunted. 2 Typhon might seem a little weird, but again, it's so easily recurred with Mira that it's really not a problem to only have 2. And you can also search it with Fiona if you really need just that perfect spot removal that Typhon gives you. For the summons, we're on 9. 2 copies of Azura, 2 copies of Chocobo. Both decks are on Earth, but I figured the Kusith was much better in this deck than in the Rydia deck, just given the Rydia deck was on just one of it. And Kusith is such a good Storm Enabler. Like that's really one of the reasons to play Earth Windstorm over another version, is that you can continuously recur your locks or any other card you really need that is dying. New edition, 2 copies of Chocobo. I figured it helps with the EX burst count a little bit in the deck, gets it up to, I believe, 7. Also kind of functions as a pseudo backup searcher. Sometimes the games where you don't draw Nordstalin can feel a little awkward, or like you get an early win backup down, but you just can't get that extra backup. Chocobo kind of helps you dig for him. It's a good EX burst, a great flashback target with Kryl. Lastly, 1 copy of Cactuar. Another real big loss for the Rydia deck to not be able to use this. However, I had a game that this literally won me the game on because my opponent kept me at damage 2. I had all 3 monsters on the field, 2 of them couldn't attack, so I Althea'd back the Rydia, played the Rydia, searched the Cactuar, went to combat, swung a Rosa and a lock, would have cracked my own lock with the Cactuar, and then swung in with the other 2 forwards. Like, just really, really good. Being able to get yourself to that damage 3 hurdle when the entire deck comes online, and all of your cards have all their text, very, very powerful. So that was the Earthwind. It lost exactly 1 game in which I opened Rydia as my only backup, followed by Tyro as my second backup, and did not see my 4th backup until way too late to recover. Still almost managed to sneak that game out, but let's go and put the Rosa back on top of the deck. This is it's just so fun to play this deck. The skill ceiling is so high, you really feel yourself every time you make new decisions with the deck that help you do it. I wish every Storm deck felt like this and not like what Monowind does. And unfortunately, I think that there needs to be hits to wind in general, and that might really hurt the Storm version of this deck. And I don't know that Earthwind Control really is going to have what it takes as a meta contender. I really think what puts this over the top is the ability to transition into a Storm deck in the late game rather than remain a Control deck the entire time. So that was I knew I was going to play some version of Storm. I think it's just the best deck in the format. So the question was what the second deck I was going to play was. If I wanted to play what I thought were the first and second best decks in the game right now, I would play Storm Avalanche. I don't have a playset of Tenzen. I don't really... a playset of Barrett. I also don't have any Tenzen, so Samurais are off the table if I wanted that. Samurais pair really well with this because there's no conflict on cards. So then I was kind of thinking, okay, I could play Twins, but I really didn't like a lot of the way the Twins list played. Not a huge aggro fan. I feel like a lot of times, a lot of my personal skill as a player comes from planning ahead, thinking ahead, making decisions that are going to pay off 2, 3, 4 turns in advance, based on things like damage foresight and stuff. And, you know, the classic Twins play of pop down 1 twin, pop down another twin, can you answer me before I kill you, doesn't really fit the Ghoul playstyle. So then I was thinking I could play Scions, and the problem with Scions, and I love Scions as a deck. I'll do a deck tech on Scions in the near future for my take on them. Scions can't beat Wind. They have a very strong Avalanche matchup and a very strong Samurais matchup, and I think that the deck itself is quite solid. It does very well against, I think, everything except for exactly Mono Wind. But it can't beat Mono Wind, and Mono Wind is the best deck in the game. And I wasn't sure that Earthwind would do well into Mono Wind either, so I figured having 2 decks weak to the best deck in the format was probably a bad idea. So I begrudgingly had to not play that deck. I thought about Knights, just because I think Knights is a very solid shell for Amaterasu. But I like kind of mid-range control-y Knights, rather than super aggressive, I'm going to kill you on turn 4 knights. You know, I like fire water as opposed to ice fire. So that wasn't really on the table. I didn't think it was that much better than Scions. So I figured at that point I should just play Scions. So I went back to an old favorite, which is Rydia Turbo. Rydia is essentially the ghoul aggro card. This deck plays very few backups, plays a lot of summons. It's very hard to deal with, the aggression this deck puts out, but it also scales very well. It's very hard to answer the board states that this deck puts up quickly, but it's not afraid to go to the late game, which I think is the thing that makes me really have a lot of fun playing this deck. Just the sheer quality and quantity of interaction it's capable of is really fun. So obviously 3 copies of Rydia. We need to power the Rydia up, so our forwards that are category 4, 2 copies of Summon Recursion Porum. It is very funny to see people go out of their way to not kill this little 2CP 2K, just because getting back a summon for Rydia and then being able to play a new Porum is so freaking powerful that you can't do it. This is Tidus, except better. Unironically. Granted, I think Tidus is a bad card. 1 copy of Legend Porum. This is just really good in specific matchups, and it's searchable with 4 cards in the deck. So when you don't need this Porum, you can go for this Porum instead. This will solo Avalanche for you. It's very good against Samurais because you can blank the Cyan or the Hien before combat. It's just very good in so many matchups that it's kind of feels like a necessary include. And then if she ever gets big enough to win the game by herself, which happens, you just feel pretty good. 3 copies of Ursula and 2 copies of her dad Yang. Pretty self-explanatory. You can go Ursula, pitch Yang another card, bring back the Yang. Rydia now has 6 counters, can cast any summon in the deck. And she also has incidental synergy with the 1 copy of Sophie. This is the other win con of the deck. And completing the Best Friends Club, 2 copies of Sarah Mobius to go with her. So, sure, you all know the combo. Sarah Mobius plus Sophie plus any other forward in those elements. Sophie's 10k, deals your opponent a point of damage. With 3 copies of Ursula and 1 copy of Lena. There's plenty of ways to recur the Sophie. That said, there's a lot more break zone hate right now, so be a little more careful with your Sophies right now. But she's not necessary for the deck to win either. She's just really good. So continuing on, so we have our 1 Lena. We're going to go through kind of our other 1 of good stuff forwards. 1 copy of Orin. Rydia is a summoner, and Orin is a magnet that also draws a card when he dies if you have a summoner on the field. And Captain Falcon's hand is kind of in the way of Orin. So the synergy is just really good here. You can recur this with Leviathan or Lena if you need to. 1 copy of Arciella. Again, you're just trying to protect this Rydia from dying. Arciella is very good at that. Also, Arciella plus Sophie is actually a 10k Sophie as long as you can spend the counter from the Arciella. 1 copy of Lakshmi. We're pretty low on backups in this list. Lakshmi is a pseudo backup when she sticks around. 1 copy of Minwu. We do have 3 different colors of summons in the deck, so it's very easy to get Minwu's alternate summoning condition online. At which point he does the Orin thing, keeps the Rydia alive. Keeping the Rydia alive means the deck continues to run. It's very hard to power up Rydia more than 3 times in a game. Minwu makes it so that you have to do it significantly less. And what was the 50th card in the deck was 1 copy of Alfino. I actually resolved the 5 cast trigger on him once to bring back an Ursula, bring back a Sophie. Pretty nice. But really, I just treated him as another copy of Lakshmi that gave me the card draw immediately to help dig for better cards. So that's the forward package. 20 forwards, so relatively low forward count, but they're pretty high impact. A lot of them your opponent really kind of has to get rid of, and the ones they don't are pretty solid beat sticks that your opponent doesn't want to get rid of because the entry effects are too good. Backups, pretty small backup list. 3 copies of Sarah. Best backup in the game. If every color had a Sarah, they'd be crazy. 1 copy of Kolka to go with it. A lot of times your turn 1 is going to be pitching most of your hand to play Sarah, play Kolka. You have both colors, you have 2 backups, most of your forwards cost 2. Kind of writes itself. 1 copy of Princess Sarah. This will always be Earth in this deck. If you have already drawn the Kolka and have already played it, Sarah, find Princess Sarah, you still at least get your 2 colors online. 1 copy of Leonora to find one of our 3 Porums, also a Category 4 character, so it helps power up one of your Rydias if you need to, always a nice little bonus. 1 copy of Aiko, EX Burst searches another Rydia, always nice. Again, half the purpose of Kolka is to go find a Rydia, Aiko does the same thing. And the last backup, 1 copy of Matoya, which actually does some really cool stuff in this deck. Most notably, this deck can't run Ku Sith because it's in the Earthwind Storm, so this is Ku Sith, was the main intent. However, this deck doesn't run Shantoto traditionally, or any other like classic board wipes. Matoya says that if I fall really far behind, or if my opponent does something really obnoxious that I can't handle otherwise, you know, I have an option of an expensive board wipe, even if it's not like ideal. So basically every mode on this card is good, so when you need specific ones, you can just go for it. Didn't come up for the board wipe, but again, I think the option of one is just really helpful. You can't run even like 5 CP Hecaton Kyre because you'll kill your own Rydia with it, which is not ideal. So summons, we're on 20 different summons. So first we're going to go with probably the most powerful one, 3 copies of Sildra. If you get Rydia to 4 counters and cast this for free, you are essentially searching out the 2 best water cards in the deck and adding them to the hand. Very good. Get your Sophie out of the deck early so she can't be hit into damage. Not a lot to say about this one. Kind of just makes sense. Very powerful card, almost ban-worthy. Up next, we have all of the Water EX Bursts. 1 copy of Moogle to help get through our deck. It's also very nice if you have Rydia but don't have the ability to power her up. Sometimes you can go play Rydia, play Moogle, draw 2, discard 1, hopefully draw into one of your Category 4 characters to make sure your Rydia is online. 2 copies of Kukulin the Impure. Just with Samurais around so many places right now, just very important to have a card like this. It's also an EX burst that draws you a card. Makes it very hard for your opponent to effectively swing in. 3 copies of 6 CP Leviathan and 2 copies of Remora. These are your big, high-cost 6 CP summons. More copies of Leviathan just because you can loop it with Porum. So you cast Leviathan, bounce one of their forwards, get back a Porum, play the Porum. When the Porum dies, you get back Leviathan, you can do it all over again. It's also just really good because, again, we're not playing the Ku Siths. This is one of our only ways to get back any forwards in the break zone. And I'm running a relatively low forward count. A lot of them are smaller bodies. You just kind of need something like this to continue going. So there's the water summons. For Earth, we have 3 copies of Mist Dragon and Glorious Mismatching Rarity. This is what took this from the Storm deck. Normally Storm would probably be on a copy or 2 of it. 1 copy of Titan, again, just looking to protect the Rydia. Also can kill Tenzin for pretty cheap if you need it. Just kind of a nice little catch-all card. When it comes up, it comes up. 2 copies of Fenrir. My locals has been infested by Dragoons lately. This is incredible against them. It's also a way of recurring Rydia or Sophie or Sarah Mobius. And lastly, we have a package of 5 fire summons, 3 Amaterasu. This is, in my opinion, the best deck for Amaterasu because you very rarely have to pay for it. 1 copy of Brynhildr. This is again castable off of 2 Rydia with 2 counters. 1 copy of 4 CP Bahamut. In my opinion, these are pretty similar cards. Bahamut is kind of like a double Brynhildr in a way. But I figured I could toolbox into these using the Porums in the list to pick kind of the one that was better for the right situation. And both of them are just good, so I wasn't really feeling too bad about either of them. This list did really well. Only lost 1 game. It was against Samurais when I did not draw any removal for a Tenzin for way too long. And got a little bit run over. Kind of had a slow start. My opponent goes turn 1 Tenzin and I just couldn't answer the board state. So that's those are my 2 decks. Again, it was 4 rounds of Swiss, followed by what would have been 2 rounds of Top Cut, but we only played the first round because it was getting late, and me and the first place player decided to kind of split the prizing. I know Travis is kind of feeling a little sad to hear that, but the games aren't being streamed. I do have recordings of a lot of the games. I'm going to be editing them and getting them up on the channel over the next week or so. So you'll get to watch me pilot both of these decks. You'll get to watch lots of other great matches and some really cool decks by some very skilled pilots from the DFW area. But yeah, those are my 2 decks from the event that went undefeated. As always, deck lists will be in the description, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think about this.